Good evening.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Professor.
Okay, so last class, we did multiple questions using the while loop, and we know that we can use the while loop to repeat action several times, right? But we need to set up the counter, right? So if you want to keep track of something, it will happen, or you want to repeat the action, we need to set up the counter. And then for the yes, no question, we will test it on the counter, right? To check, is the counter valid? Or are we doing the action enough time yet? And then we will have the action that we need to repeat, and then we will need to change the counter. If we don't change the counter, then every time when you test the counter, it will pass the test, and then it will keep doing the action. Then it will run into infinite loop. Now, once the counter failed, right, it's invalid, then the answer is no, then we'll move on to the next instruction. And last class, like some of you mentioned, the for loop, right? So that will be the new type of loop we will learn today, which you can think of, the code will be shorter. So pretty much what it does is the 3-step, we do it on the counter. Now we will have it all on the same line, right? So if you look at the while loop, we will always set up the counter, test the counter, and we need to change the counter. Now in the for loop, after you have the for statement, and in the parenthesis, you will set up the counter, and you will test the counter, and then you will change the counter. So you will have the code all in a line, and then you will separate them by the semicolon. And once you've done that, you can have wherever the action you want to repeat in the braces. And the flow chart will be the same. Right? So we'll have the same flow chart. It's just if you use the while loop, pretty much the code look like the flow chart. Where for the for loop, you have the same flow chart, but all the setting about the counter will be on the same line. So let's look at the example. So let's say we want to say hello 10 times, right? So we did this example last class using the while loop, right? So let's recall what we did last time. So for while loop, again, we will set up the counter, right? So we'll have int c, and let's say we start with 1. Then our question will be, do we do it 10 times yet? So for c, less than or equals to 10, we want it to print out hello. So we will see out hello. And again, the /n means you will end the line, right? So after you do the action you want to repeat, you need to change the counter. So you want to increment that by 1. And again, C++ is just a shortcut for saying C equals to C plus 1. And then we'll pretty much finish our code here. Now, if you look at it, we set up the counter. We test the counter. And then we increment the counter. Now I see people say we could also use C plus equals. Yeah, so you can also use C plus equals 1. They all mean the same thing. So whichever one you use, it works the same. Now, if you want to write this using the for loop, you will see your code will be much shorter, since you will have your for statement, and you will just set up your counter inside the for loop. So you have int c equals to 1, and then you have c less than or equals to 10, right? That's your question. And then you will change the counter. So we have C++ here. Then we will have the code for repeat the action. So we'll print hello backward /n, which means we will print each hello in separate line. So you see we can have the code here just in pretty much 2 lines. You have a for loop and then you have the code you're trying to repeat. Any questions here?
Yeah, Professor, can you show the setup again, up, like going up?
Good?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you look at that, like the difference is we have this 3 step about the counter in the same line, right? So instead of have it in 3 separate places, you have it all at one place. Okay, now we will put the code in. So since we did the while loop last class, I will just have the code using the for loop. Okay, and we will save it. So here is our code again, and we will compile it. And run it. And if you see, we will have the hello 10 times. Okay, and my student from my previous section asked a question: can we declare the variable in the for loop? Yes, right. So just like how we declare the counter outside, we can do it when we set up the counter. However, you can also declare outside the for loop. So the difference is if you declare your variable inside the for loop, you can only access the value inside the for loop. Once you get out of the for loop, you can't access it anymore. Right. So for example, if I want to modify my code a little bit, so let's say after I get out of the loop, I want to print out the value for C. Okay, and notice that I declare the variable inside the for loop. And let's see what happens when we run it. So this when we compile it, we will get an error message say that C was not declared in the scope, right? That's because in our main function, we did not declare the C and we only declared the C in our for loop. So if you want to access the variable inside the for loop as well as outside the for loop, then you need to declare it outside of the for loop. So easy fix will be you can just go to the code instead of declare the variable inside the for loop, we'll just declare outside. And in the for loop, you can just assign the variable C equals to 1. Now when we run it, So again, this is our code. So now we don't get an error message and we can run it. So you see we print the hello 10 times and we print the value C, we will have C equals to 11. Right, and that's what we should expect because when C is equals to 11, it will fail the test. It will fail our question about the counter. Right? We need our counter to be less than equals to 10 in order to let it into the loop. Now, when you're C equals to 11, 11 is greater or equals, it's not less than equals to 10, it's greater than 10. Right, so it will get out of the loop and it will print out the C value, and that's where the 11 coming from. Any questions here?
No.
Okay, then we will move on. Now, if you look at the next exercise, it asks you to print the square of numbers from 1 to 20, which means we want to print 1 square is 1, 2 square is 4, 3 square is 9, and so on, and then up to 20 square, which is 400. So what's the repeat action here? What action are we repeating here?
Multiplying a number by itself, squaring it.
So we're multiplying a number by itself because we want to get the square.
Can I see the problem one more time?
Oh, sorry. Can everyone see the
Yeah, thank
question?
you. So it's going to repeat C out and then the integer multiplying itself.
Okay, so let's say we call the value C, then we will have C out C times C. So this action will get repeat multiple times. Then maybe we want to separate each square with empty space again. Right, so we repeat this 20 times. And what will our counter be?
From 1 to 20.
From 1 to 20. So we know we can do it using a for loop. Right, so we will set up the counter so we can initialize it equals to 1. And we need the counter going from 1 to 20. So when C is less than or equals to 20, we want to go through the loop. And each time we will increment that by 1. So we have C plus plus again. Now the action we will repeat will be C out, and then we will print out C times C. And then we will have a space after it. And once we finished printing the 20 squared, before we exit the program, we should end the line, right? Since we did not print them in separate line, right? So if you don't end the line, you will have our Venus heading right after our 20 squared. And we don't want that to happen, so we'll end the line here. Okay, so here's our for loop. And then we'll print C times C. And then we will separate each square by space. And once we finish printing out all the 20 squared, we will end the line. Okay, when we run that, where we see we have 20 squared. We have 1 square, 2 square, 3 square, 4 square, up to 20 squared. So it does print us the first 20 squared. Okay, now if we look at the code here again, do we need this bracket here? Is this two
Not-
braces necessary?
If it's only one command, I don't think so.
Okay, so since we only have one command here, this braces here is not needed. However, you should still have it just in case if you want to edit your code later. If you want to like maybe add another instruction in, you won't forget to add the braces back. So since you already have it there, and also this braces here after the for, it kind of highlight what action you are repeating. So it's always good to have it there. Okay. So now let's say you want to print a line of 20 stars. How can we do it? Well, I can give you a solution. You can pretty much do it the first day of class. You can just have a C out and then start counting the star. You can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And I believe that's 20 star. Is this a good solution?
It's not efficient.
Okay, so it's not efficient, but it works, right?
Yeah.
Now, what's the downside of doing it like this?
For longer problems, you wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah, so,
Or it
so
would
if we,
take
You have more chance to make an error too.
so if you, let's say you want to print like 100 star, right? You won't expect yourself to count from 1 to 100, or what about like 1,000 of them, right? So it's very hard to do it manually, like just keep counting how many stars, and then we need to hard code it. And also, it's very easy to make a mistake, right? It's very hard to keep track of how many stars we already did. And I see people already have the shorter way to do it, or we can easily have a for loop to do the same job, right? So if you look at the code here, there are some action here that's repeating, right? Which is printing the star. But we are printing the star 20 times. So we can have so what we are doing here is pretty much we can see out the star for 20 times. So we can have a for loop and set up a counter to keep track of how many times we are doing, and then we want to do it from 1 up to 20. So from 1 up to 20, there are 20 of them, and we will increment that by 1. And the repeat action will be printing out the star. And again, before we exit, or we should end the line. So that will do this. That will do the same job. Okay, and I see people asking, will they be underneath each other or they will be on the same line? Well, C++ will move on to the next line until you tell it to move on to the next line. So if you just see out, it will just printing right after each other. So that's why whenever you want to go to a new line, you will need to tell it end the line. And we only do it once since end lines outside of the for loop, so you only get to do it once. So the only action that's repeating is printing the star, and end line only get to do it once. So if you look at it for the for loop, you will do the star 20 times. And once you reach the 20 times, you will go out, do the end line, and then you will finish your code there. Now I see people asking, will it be in a new line if it's in the bracket? Yeah, so if you put the end line in the bracket, then what happened will be all the star will be on its own line. So you won't get like a horizontal line of 20 star, but you will probably get like a vertical line of 20 star, and you'll have 20 row. Right, do we see like now here we have the 20 line, the 20 star here. Okay, so advice for you when you think you need a loop, always ask yourself.
Can you
Can
move
see-
black
Sorry.
the
Yeah,
thing?
great. Thank you very much.
Everyone can see the screen, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So when you think you need a loop, ask yourself the following two questions first. What's the repeated action? Right? What action is happening repeated time? And second, you will ask yourself how many times you will repeat the action. If you can answer these two questions, you can pretty much set up the for loop. Okay, and I see people asking, what if you didn't have the end line at the very end? Well, if you don't have the end line here, that means you will just print the 20 star and then you will just end the program. Then remember this Venus heading instead of this line. as a separate line, this part of the code will be right after your star if you don't have the end line. Because C++ don't know goes to a new line unless you code it. So I see people asking why does int c equals to 1 instead of 0. It's really up to you how you want to initialize your code. So I started at 1 and then I have c less than or equal to 0. So that means c will literally come from 1 up to 20. It's just easier to check. If you want to start at 0, there's nothing wrong with it. Then your c need to be strictly less than 20 instead of less than or equals to 20. Then your c will become from 0 to 19. And from 0 to 19, that's 20 number. So it really depends on how you want to set it. And I see people asking what's different between C++ and ++C. So if you asking this question, that means you already have some experience in coding. So if you see C++ in the for loop, that means you will start with your C value, and then you will go into the loop. And once you finish the code, right? Once you go through the loop, it will increment it at 1. So it will run the code before you increment it. Where if you do ++C, it will increment it before you run the code. So there is like an order difference. And I see people asking, why is it less than and not greater than? Well, if you change it to greater than, when your c is equal to 1, 1 is not greater than 20. It won't get into the loop. But remember, only when the answer to this yes, no question is true, right? It's yes, then you will go through the loop. Otherwise, you will skip and move on. Are we all good here?
Yes, Professor.
Yes.
Okay, and another benefit for writing this code in a for loop is we can modify it for other users, right? If you just hard code the 20 star, let's say you want to change it to 30 star, 100 star, then you kind of need to redo the whole thing. You're not going to use the 20 star. But if you use the for loop, you can easily change it. And in fact, you can ask the user how many stars you want to see, and then you can print in the star.
Professor,
Yes.
when would it be favorable to use a while loop, and when would it be favorable to use a for loop?
Okay, so if you know how many times you will do your action, or how many times you will repeat your action, you can always use a for loop, as long as you know how many times you are doing it. Now, if you don't know how many times you are doing the action, then you will go for a for loop. Now let's modify the code here. Now let's say instead of print 20 star, you want to ask the user how many star they want to print. Right, so you want to ask the user how many stars do you want? How do we modify the code here? So since we ask the user for input, right, so we need a new variable to store the number. Right, and I see people say N1, so I will just have N here. And then we will store it. We need to see in the value N. And now, what do I need to change on this for loop? Okay, I see people say change the 20 to N. Right, so instead of printing 20 star, now you will do N star, wherever the user wants you to print. And that's pretty much all you need to change. So we will save the code here. And I see people asking, if you know how many times you need to repeat, you can use for loop, otherwise use a while loop. Yes. You can always use a while loop, like whenever you're trying to do a repeat action. But if you know like exactly how many times you want to repeat your action, then you should go for a for loop. It's just the code is shorter. Okay, so now you will ask how many stars we want to do. So let's say we want to do 4 star, we will just print as 4. If we run it again, we want to see 15 star, you will print as 15. Now let's say we want to, if we want to see 111 star, we will print as 111 star. Now it's not in the same line since my terminal is not big enough. So if I make it big enough, it will be on the same line.
Oh, Professor, so can you go back to the coding
The code for which part?
for this one for the
Here?
start?
So you have the code here.
Oh, that's okay. I see. All right.
That's the modified version. But when you're trying to ask a user how many star do you want, and then you will print in however many star there. Good.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Now let's say instead of just print a line of star, you want to print a 5 by 5 square of stars, which means you want to print something that look like this. Okay, I need one more row. So you want to print this. How can we print it? Okay, I see people say use to for loop, right? So, and we know we want to use for loop because we see some repeat action here, right? So if we ask ourselves the 2 questions, what's the repeated action here? And 2, how many times? So if you just look at this figure, what are we repeating?
You need 5 lines of stars.
So we need 5 lines of stars. So the repeat action will be lines of stars. Right, or I should say line of 5 stars. And then you have it 5 times. Now for the line of 5 star, to make a line of 5 star, there's another repeat action where you will print the star and then you will print the star 5 times for each row. So that's why we need 2 for loop here. So for the first, right, for the outer, if you just look at the big picture, but you need to print five lines or 5 rows of the star. So you will have a for loop. And then I would just call it when r equals to 1, when r equals to 2, when r equals to 3, when r equals to 4, and when r equals to 5. So I will just use r as the counter. But we can use it to represent number of rows you want. So r equals to 1, we can start with r equals to 1, and we want to end at r equals to 5. So r less than or equals to 5. Then we will increment it by 5. So that will make you repeat the action 5 times. Now to print each line, if you look at that, we print the star 5 times. What else we have in this line? Besides the star, there's one other thing you actually printing, but you don't see it here.
And line.
The end line. So the star get to print 5 times, and you will print an end line once. So you will have a for loop for the 5 stars. And we'll just use the C. You can think of it as counter, or you can think of it as rows. But when C equals to 1 up to C equals to 5. Then we will print the star 5 times. Now notice I have a star with the empty space just to make the figure more like a square instead of printing the star right next to each other. Because when you print it in separate row, you will see between row and row, there's kind of like a little space there. Okay, so now I have 5 stars here. Now for each row, after we print the 5 star, we also need to print an end line, but you only get to print once. So you will print outside the for loop, right? Outside the inner for loop, right? So after this is the 5 star. Let me write that out. So this part will give you the 5 star. And then you will see out the end line. That will add the end line at the end. Then you will finish the code for each row. And then you will print the row 5 times. And that's pretty much the code. So if we go back, okay, and then we need 2 for loop, 1 for the row. I see people that asking, does the order matters if we put C going from 1 to 5 and then the R going from 1 to 5? Well, for this question, it does not matter since you have a 5 by 5. Even when you switch the order, you still get a squared. Since the row you repeat it 5 times, then the column you repeat it 5 times. However, it won't make a difference if let's say you want to have a rectangle. Right, since C++ will print out the figure row by row. So the order matters.
Professor,
Mhm.
can you reuse the variable name for the integer since it only exists inside the condition for the for loop? You could reuse R.
Okay, so if you want to reuse R for the inner loop,
Yeah, you could do that, right?
if it depends what you want to do. So, I mean, yes, you can use the R inside of your loop, but if you want to use it to set up your inner loop, you will run into problem. Because once we declare the R here, you can use the R inside the loop. So if you declare the variable again, it will kind of mess up the R. Then when you increment the R outside, you kind of like do it twice. But you will see what happened. I can show you. Let me just have.
So when you declare a variable for a for loop, it's declared for everything within the for loop, but not for outside the for loop, right?
Yes, yes. So once you declare for the for loop, you can access it anywhere inside of your loop. But once you get out of it, it's not exist there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so here's our code. So what problem here is if you declare the R here and then just use the R, and if you let R equals to 1, and then it would, and then R will change from 1 to 5. And once you get out and then go into the loop, now your R will be 6, because this will stop when R equals to 6. And then when you get out of the loop and then trying to go through the outer loop, or instead of equals to 2, it will increment it. So let me just run this for you. Okay, so this is our code. And then you see we have like a 5 by 5 stars. Okay, now if we go back, let me modify the code. Now let's say I should reuse the R. Do you want to initialize the R equals to 1 again? Okay, so if you reuse the R, so you only print a line of 5 stars. Right, since here, well, when you get into the loop, you initialize R equals to 1, so you go into the loop, and you initialize R, so you pretty much change R equals to 1 again. It will print a star, and it will increment it. When R equals to 2, it will print the second star, and then print the third star, fourth star, fifth star, and then R will get incremented once, then R will become 6. And when R becomes 6, you will get out of the loop, and then you will print the end line. And once you get out from the loop, you will your R will become 6. And then when you're trying to go back to the loop, you will check is 6 less than or equal to 5. Now the answer is no, then you will get out. So you will only get to print the row once. Any questions here?
No.
Okay. And I see people ask, can you use the int C, just adjust the number that's less than or equal to the right. I don't know what you are mean here. What do you mean adjust the number to the right? I see. Use. Okay. So now let's go back to our program. So I will change the int. I will change it back the code. Now I see people asking, does the order matters here, the inner loop and outer loop? The answer to that is yes, because C++ will print row by row. So you can think of the outer loop pretty much control how many row you are printing, and then the inner for loop will tell you how many things you are printing in each line. Like for example, if I change the file to, here to a 10, then you will get a 10 by 5 rectangle.
Professor.
Mhm.
Do you need each component for the for loop? Like if you took one part out, would the for loop still work?
Which part are you taking out?
Say you wanted to make like the same thing with the stars, except the stars amount equals to the row number. So for row 1, it's 1 star. For row 2, it's 2 stars.
Yeah, then you would. Yes, you could do that. So inside the for loop, you are able to access the variable. So if you set your, like, let's say C instead of equal to 5, you want to print that to be, let's say, less than or equal to R, then you will just get a different shape.
But could you take out like the C++ part and still have the for loop run, because it's still going like
Okay,
inside?
So if you take out the C++, what's going on is, remember, what does this 3 component mean? It means you set up the counter, like initialize it, you will test the counter, and then you will change the counter. Now, if you take out the C++, that means you are not changing your counter. Now, if you don't change your counter, and if your counter will pass every time you are not changing it, what happens? It will just keep going to the loop and keep printing star. It will keep doing it without stop. Then your program pretty much never end.
I mean, say if you turn the nested for loop to R, and then took out the plus plus, because it's gonna, once it goes to the outer for loop, it's gonna already go increment by 1.
So what do you want to change this C++ to?
What I was saying is change the nested for loop into the integer to R, and then taking out the plus plus.
So you want to change this part to R?
No, change the integer C equals 1 to R, and then take out C++.
then
That work?
you don't, okay, so if so for that, then you will initialize your R to like, then every time when you go into like a new line, like going to new row, you'll see will be a different, like you will store a different variable. So you don't print the star 5 times. You see when R equals to 1, if you change this C to R, then you will have R equals to 1. Okay, so I think we run into like the same problem as the previous one. If you are reusing your R here, it will mess up the code. It won't do the same job here.
Even if you're not reassigning it?
Because if you reassigning it, then when you go out of the loop,
No, I
you're
mean, if you're
losing
not reassigning it. If you don't reassign it and put it in the a nested for loop,
Mhm.
and you just have it R and then semicolon,
but you are
R,
using the same variable R. Then when you get out of the for loop, you lose track of which row you are doing. Right? Remember, like when we're trying to print like a square or a rectangle, you need to keep track of which row you are, and you need to also keep track of how many, like in each row, how many column or how many objects you are printing. So you need two variables to keep track of how many things are there, right? One for the row and one for the column. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Right, because if you reusing it for the row and then the column, you will mess up the variable. And once you get out for the outer loop, you already change the number. So you kind of, you won't know which row you are in because you are using the same variable. Okay, and for this question, what I want you to do is think about how can we modify the code. So we can ask the user what dimension of the rectangle they want. So maybe you can ask the user how many row you want to have the star and how many column you want to have. So print a rectangle where you will ask the user for the input. So you will figure out how you will modify the code from this one. Okay, in next class, we will use the, we will do more question on the nested for loop and then print different figure. Then we will see what's the relation between the row and then the column and how can we use it to print different figures. Okay. So we will,
So basically, we're gonna modify this latest program to ask how many rows and how many stars.
yes.
Basically, how many columns and how many rows.
Yeah, so you will ask the user for the input. So user will tell you this, let's say I want 5 row 10 column.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Okay, and I see people kind of have it. You will have C for, you will see into variable, and then you will have that number instead of the row and then the column. But try it and then run your program, compile it, and then see does it work. Okay, and then we will start with this exercise next class. Any other question?
Take care, Professor.
Okay, I will see everyone next Tuesday. Have a nice day.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Professor. Have a nice weekend.
Have a good weekend, Professor.